Hi, welcome to the guitar setup and maintenance video. I'm Arnquist, and I've been repairing and building guitars since 1972. I've worked on all kinds of notable people, anywhere from Carlos Santana, the Beach Boys, Eric Clapton, John Entwistle, the list goes on and on and on. Anyway, I want to show you how to do some things as basic as restringing your guitar, whether it be a flat top, electric, or a classical guitar, how to identify some problems with setup, and how to do some basic maintenance so you can take care of your guitars at home and really appreciate the instruments they Before we get started, I like to identify the parts of both the electric and the acoustic guitars. So let's get started here. At the headstock end, this is the headstock. These are the tuners or machine heads. This is your truss rod cover. This is the nut. You have your frets on the fingerboard. At the other end of the strings, you have the bridge, your bridge pins, the bridge saddle. This is your pick guard. Let me identify the parts in an electric guitar now. They're basically the same. There are a few differences, though. We have the headstock on this end. These are the machine heads or tuners. This is the nut, truss rod cover, frets, which go down all the way down the fingerboard. The striping on the side of the fingerboard on this guitar is called binding. These are the inlays. You have a pick guard, the neck pickup, the bridge pickup selector switch, the bridge, tailpiece, your volume and tone, and the body. This is the input jack. On the back, we have the access plates to the controls, your volume and tone, and over here, your pickup selector switch. Okay, we're going to learn how to restring several kinds of guitars today. I'm going to start with flat top acoustics and the different kinds of strings and how to put them on. There's basically two different methods to do that work. There are several kinds of strings that you can use. There are bronze, there are brass, and silk and steels. They all have their own sound and their own feel. Also, there are also different kinds of gauges, and we'll get into that later, but we'll start with stringing this guitar and how to do this. You just unwrap the string, and I take the ball end. You'll see that most strings have some kind of a winding down here at the ball end that overlaps, and the part that sticks up here, there's a little hump. I take that and I bend it like that, put it in the pinhole, stick the pin in like that. That's it on that end. On this end, you feed the string in, so you have about that much slack on the string, and you take one wrapper on the top of the post, pull it tight, and take the tail. I put it up like that, and I use a peg winder. These are really handy. Makes it a lot easier to string a guitar, a lot faster. Takes a little bit of practice to get used to that motion. And do another one. So you put the string in, put the pin in with the notch facing the neck, push it in, pull this up to make sure it's secure, and then start your stringing process on the machine heads. There again, you put about that much slack in it and wrap your string once around the top of the post, pull your tail up, and then wrap your string so that each wrap that you put on after that first one goes below the last one. What this does is, because the shape of the machine head is shaped like an hourglass, that top wrap pulls down, all the bottom wraps pull up, grabs the string. After you tune it, it stays in tune very well. You can see the notch on the pin here, and this is the notch that needs to face toward the neck. That's where the string actually fits inside the guitar, just like that. So you put your string in, put the pin in with the notch facing the neck, push it down, pull up on your string at the same time. It's secure. Come from the center again, about that much slack. Wrap it around, pull it up, and wrap it on. Remember to get each wrap below the last one. If you don't, the string will slip over over all those previous wraps that you put on, and it won't stay in tune. If you get too many wraps, you need to undo it, because then you get too many wraps, it just won't stay in tune, period. Now you see this is a standard peg winder. For those of you who get tired, I use an electric drill with an adapter that works real good. After you string about 20 or 30 guitars in a day, like I do, you go to that real fast. I'll do another one here. Pin again with a notch toward the neck. Make sure that's secure. Around the top, pull the tail up. Once you get good at this, you can have races with your friends putting strings on. I've seen guys do it in under 3 minutes easily. I know it takes beginners about an hour to put strings on. Once you get good at it, it goes very quickly. When I put strings on, I align the holes in the machine heads so that the holes on this side are at this angle, and on this side at an angle like this, so you kind of have this pyramid shape up here, if you will, at the headstock. It just makes it easier to string. A little bit faster. And that's doing a flat top. After you put your strings on, you need to stretch your strings out and tune the guitar. And what I do is I take the 2 plain strings and put some tension on the strings, grab the 2 strings together, and just kind of gently pull on them to stretch them out a little bit, work my way down the neck, back up toward the bridge. The wound strings, I just do one at a time. Kind of pull on them. I put my hand over the end, so if I get too aggressive and the string breaks, it won't come flying back and stab me in the arm. I know that looks kind of scary. You think that you might break the strings, but it won't hurt it at all. As a reference point to tuning the guitars, I recommend everybody get a tuning fork. Even people with perfect pitch need someplace to start off with, and this is a great place to have a reference point. Tuners are nice, but they don't give you that initial reference point usually. And this, you can do 2 ways. You strike your tuner, you can hold it on the guitar, and you can hear that tone, and you just match it with whatever string it's supposed to correspond to. This is an A440, and it tunes to this string. So I'll show you how this works. The other way to do it is, because it's nice to tune and pick with 2 hands, is to strike it and then hold it in your mouth. And that will vibrate your whole head, and you'll hear it internally. It's an interesting feeling. And just tune the rest of the strings. And when you get it up to basic pitch, I stretch the strings again, just to make sure that they're good and stretched out. This is where it would be nice to have the tuner sitting in front of me. I can cheat that way. There you go. That's how you string a flat top. This is one of the easier instruments there is to string. The strings feed through the back of the body, and it has an assembly back here with a series of holes, and you just take all your strings and you feed them through. I do all of them usually at once, setting it in my lap makes it easier, but for here, well, we won't be doing that. There are a couple of things that they have done on Fender guitars that make things different, as this is the most popular guitar. I wanted to bring this, most popular electric guitar that is, and show you there's a couple of tricks to how to put the strings on here. It has a nice safety feature on the machine heads in that you don't have any bare wire sticking out the end, so you won't stab yourself. Leo was very intuitive in that area. Anyway, what you do as far as stringing is, after you put all your strings on, is there's a standard measurement that Fender, the factory, uses, and what they tell you to do is for these two machine heads, you cut 2.5 posts past the tuner that you're going to put the string in. So for your low E string, you go 2.5, and at that point, you cut the string, and you just take the string and stick it down into the machine head like that, can't get over, and start winding the string on. Each wrap going below the last one, just like that, very easy. The same holds true for the A string. You go 2.5 past, cut it, put it in, wind each wrap down. That's it for those. When you get to your D and your G string, or your 3rd and your 4th string, you have to go 4 posts past the one that you're putting it in, because they only have, on the old ones, the vintage series, they only have one of these little string clips here, and with only one, you need to have those extra winds on that. So I just show people, this is how I show them. I just pull it back to hold the string at the tuner that I'm going to put it in, pull it back to the low E string, and go 4 tuners past, cut it, put it in the tuner, and wrap it down. Grab a peg winder, and that gives enough tension right here so that the string won't pop out of the nut. It's very important on a Fender or any guitar. The G string, or 3rd string, is exactly the same thing. And you go 4 tuners again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't make a big enough point about each wrap being below the last one. Being neat will make you stay in tune a lot better, make it a lot easier to change strings. It just works out a lot better in the long run. For your 1st and 2nd string, you go back to the 2.5 measurement. So you pull it back and go 2.5. You cut it. Put it under the little clip there. On electric guitars, you have a vast a variety of gauges of strings that are available. Fortunately, all the manufacturers that package strings have basically put together the same packages of gauges anyway. Everyone has a 9 to 42 set. 9 meaning this is a 9,000 string, and this is a 42,000 string. Almost everybody packages that set. So whether it be Smedley Brothers from New York or the Van Norteners of California, they will have the same string gauge. And so any time you change from one brand to the next, they will basically have the same feel. They may sound differently. The wound strings are going to sound different, but they will it will always be consistent, so that you can go to any store and just get that. You may find that there's a specific kind of string that will last longer for you. It's not that other strings are made badly. It has to do with the pH balance of you and how you react to the metal that it's made out of, and also how aggressive you are on your playing technique. On electric guitars, you can pretty much use any gauge of string that you want. If you're tuning, you need to tell whoever you're having set up your guitar, whatever the specific gauge of string that you want to use. You notice that when I strung this guitar that I had all the strings off at once. If you take all your strings off at once, it will not hurt an electric guitar. These are made to really take a lot of abuse, and they have a neck reinforcement system in all of them so that you won't have any problems. I do get asked a lot, is it okay to take all my strings off at once? And yes, it is. I have in my shop anywhere from 20 to 100 guitars at any one time, and I'd say half of them have no strings on it as we speak. The fear is that if you're going on vacation or something, or it's in storage, that you should do something with the tuning and tune it down so it won't hurt the neck. That fear is for guitars that were made for old catalog companies, 20, 30 years ago, or for guitars that were made before World War II that had no neck reinforcement in them at all. And in a modern guitar that's been made basically since 1960, there's no problem with that whatsoever. I've never seen a neck go bad just by taking all your strings off at once. Classical guitars have 3 nylon strings and 3 silk-wound nylon strings, and they have no truss rods in the neck. There's no metal reinforcement. Electric guitars and flat-top acoustics usually have either some sort of metal reinforcement or graphite reinforcement in the neck. The metal, for the most part, most of them are adjustable either inside this hole here or at the headstock. The headstock will have a little plate or something here to identify that. On a classical guitar, you have no reinforcement whatsoever, and a lot of people ask me, is it okay to take all my strings off at one time? On a classical guitar, yeah, it is, but I wouldn't leave them all off for a long period of time. On a flat top, it's okay to take all your strings off at once because there is that reinforcement, and it's made to take a significant different amount of tension of string on the top. Which brings up the point of I see classical guitars with standard flat top bronze or brass strings on it a lot, and that will take the bridge and pull it off the face of the guitar and loosen the support system on the inside. These are not made to take that kind of string. These do need classical nylon strings. You can identify that always by the fact that it has no pins down here, 1, and 2. It has a much wider neck, and the roller machine heads like this. In stringing this, I find that using a lighter helps me out a lot. And for those of you who are under the age of 18 and don't have an operator's license for one of these, I suggest that you, get some parental supervision. What I use this for is to put a ball end on the string, and that will make the string stay in tune a lot better. And the fear of slippage down here after you learn how to tie this knot, it makes it stay put. It has a stopping point. It's not absolutely necessary, but I prefer to do it this way. So I'll show you how you do this. This is also a child-proof lighter, so see if I can operate it. Notice I'm not really lighting the string directly. Just get it warmed until I get a nice ball end. When it's shiny like this, it's still hot, and you can burn yourself real bad, so let it go dull and wait a few seconds after it gets dull, and then you can deal with this. You can see it's dull now. I'll show you how to put this on. The knot tying at this end is very critical. It's very easy to do, actually. You take this end of the string and wrap the tail around it. Goes around it, and then you tuck it under, pull it back up over, and tuck it back under again, so that you have 2 loops on that. The ball end that you made, place that on the back side of this tie block. This is called the tie block right here. I just hold it at the back side and then pull this string here, and you can see that that's tied back there now. If it ends up on the top of the tie block, it won't stay in tune and it will slowly unwind itself. You need to have it on the back side. Just pull it tight and make it secure. That's it. I'm going to jump to the wound strings and show you a little trick. It's a little bit different than the plain strings. This is not a metal string. This is a silk wound nylon string. Don't get it confused with a standard electric guitar string or an acoustic guitar string. There is a difference. On most of these strings, the manufacturer has a stiff end and they have a loose end. I see a lot of people use this loose end to tie down here. Don't use that end, use the stiff end. What I do on this is, to make it easier to string, after I put it through, I take the end of the string and I kink it instead of putting a ball end on this end. And I loop it around, similar to the other string that we did. Loop it around only once. You only need one time. And you take that little kink there and put it on the back side of the tie block and pull it tight, just like that. And that's it. Now comes the tough part. There are several published versions of how to put strings on the machine heads up here. Strings for classical guitars have changed a lot over the years. They originally were what they called it gut strings. They were actually made out of sheep intestines, and they did not stay in tune very well. And thanks to Andres Segovia, and they came out with a better string. Came out with his nylon strings, and they've perfected them quite a bit since he first asked years ago to have a decent string made. Well, in putting the strings on down here, the old way was to loop a series of knots and twisting them together, and I find that very archaic. It's also very difficult to remove strings, and it's really, to learn two different knots on the guitar, it's very difficult to remember all that. And this is just really easy to put strings on. You can use the tension of the string to keep it on here. I'm going to move the guitar around here so that you can get a better shot of this. I align my tuners so that the holes aim up at an angle like this, away from the nut. When you feed your string in, just feed it in, just like doing a flat top acoustic. I give myself about this much slack, and I grab a peg winder. For the first and the sixth string, I wind toward the center of the headstock. Each wrap, just take it, and wrap it around right next to the last one, and it will overlap that tail of string coming through the peg. These, by the way, are tuners or machine heads, tuning pegs. They have a variety of different names. They're all correct. You'll hear me call them different things during this video. And you just keep winding. You notice the string is starting to now, at this point, lay down across this section of the string. And each wrap is just after the last one. This will hold this section of the string so that it won't slide back through the tuner. And when you take the string off, it comes off very easily. If you have a series of knots up here, it's very difficult to get off. Plus, you have to untie this end, and it's very time-consuming. This works great. We'll go to the plain side over here. We do exactly the same thing. You have about that much slack. And here on the first string, or high E string, you wrap to the center of the headstock again. We jumped ahead here, and I'm just going to put this A string on just for time convenience. And you'll see how I wind this to the outside. Each wrap right after the last one. Don't jump across because it won't stay in tune. See how it's laying over the string here? See how it lays across the top of that right there? It's very critical. And continue winding it on. And you go ahead and you do these two machine heads, these two tuners, you wrap them the same way, wrap them to the outside of the headstock. Back here on the last plain one. Once again, It's around the main section of the string, underneath, and then loop it back around again. Keep that end of the string with the ball end on the back side of the tie block down here. Just pull it snug. Let me move this around here so the camera can see how the ends of the strings are on the back of the tie block. On the 3 plain ones, the 3 wound ones. It's very important that you do that. In this section, we're going to talk about intonation and setting and knowing whether or not your guitar is set up properly and whether or not you need to have somebody fix it or you can adjust it yourself. The key features on intonation is this area right here. This is called the bridge on a Gibson Les Paul. This is a tune-o-matic style bridge, and this specifically is called an ABR1 tune-o-matic. There is another bridge that they commonly use, which is a Nashville tune-o-matic. It's basically the same thing. It's just machined a little bit differently. This is the original style bridge they put on Gibson guitars since the mid-50s. On a Fender Stratocaster, they have this is their bridge, and in setting intonation, you need to adjust the length of the strings and change the length of all these saddles. On both of these, that's how you intonate them. I'm going to move the Strat aside and grab the Les Paul here. You'll find that if you pick up a Les Paul, it's considerably heavier than a Fender guitar, but it also has definitely a, as they say, a heavier sound to it. In intonating this guitar, the idea of what this does is because of different size of strings and different tensions of strings, you need to change the actual length of each string so that it's in tune as you play up the neck. There are several factors that are critical in that. You need to have frets in good shape. The crown, meaning the curvature of the top of the fret, needs to be the same all the way up the neck. Your guitar needs to be set up, and in setting it up you need a straight neck. Your nut needs to be cut correctly so that they're all off, the strings are all off the first fret, and that your action is set for whatever you desire in action. I get asked a lot to have guitars set up as low as possible, buzzing, which has been shortened to à la poib. In fact, it's become a joke at my household that when I die, on my tombstone it will read, "Here lies Mark Arnquist, as low as possible without buzzing." In intonating this, because you have two kinds of strings, you have the 3 plain and the 3 wound. There's a basic pattern that you always see. The smaller the string in those groupings, the closer to the neck it will be. If you can zoom in here on this tune-o-matic, you'll notice that the E right here and the B is behind the E, and the G is way back here, so you get kind of this line coming at an angle. When you come over here to the 3 wound strings, the D, the smallest of those 3 strings, is the furthest one out front, and then the A, and then your low E. You'll also notice on the old style bridges, a lot of repairmen, and actually the factory as well, turn this saddle and this saddle around to face the opposite direction. That's done just to give more adjustment to your intonation. When I intonate a guitar, I set it on the bridge pickup, not the neck pickup. There's some confusion in most of the major manufacturers, and when you talk to a guitar repairman or people in music stores, whether this is a front or a back pickup. And Gibson and Fender have always disagreed which is which, so to end the confusion, this is the bridge pickup, this is the neck pickup, and if you have a Stratocaster which has 3 pickups or any other 3 pickup style guitar, the one that's in the middle, that's the middle pickup. That ends the confusion. I set the guitar on the bridge pickup, turn the volume up all the way on the guitar, and turn the tone control up all the way on the guitar. What you're doing is that you're tuning the harmonic and the fretted note to the same pitch. I use a very expensive Peterson strobe tuner, and what this your average person doesn't have. These are about $500. And I wouldn't recommend that as your average guitar player go buy one, but you can buy a good quartz chromatic tuner, and that will help you out in at least checking your intonation. They're not nearly as accurate as this machine, but this is what I use in the shop, and I have 3 of these. in checking your intonation, you use the harmonic at the 12th fret, and you press at the 12th fret, and the idea is to move the saddle back and forth to get the same note. The harmonic will always be correct, and the fretted note, that's the one that you're trying to adjust. If it's sharp, that means the saddle is too close to the neck, and you need to move it away from the neck. And if it's flat, you go the opposite direction. Okay, let's check the G string or third string. So, remember the open note is correct. The harmonic, which is just your finger barely touching the string at the 12th fret, is correct. The fretted note is we're trying to match that harmonic. You can hear how flat that is. That's about 20 to 30 cents flat. A cent is 1/100th of a note, and that's how accurate this tuner is. I'll adjust that and get this in tune. Because it's flat, I need to sharpen the string, and I need to pull the saddle toward the neck. I'll just turn the volume down so that I won't make a lot of racket. And we'll check it now. Tune it back to pitch. Play the harmonic, check the fretted note. And that's still just a little bit flat, so I will adjust it just a little more. A little bit makes a big difference. There you go. It's right on the money. I can go through all of these strings and make sure that everything is okay. Because I do this all day long, you'll notice I'm not using a pick. You can use a pick. It doesn't make any difference. I have this big thumbnail that I use. Wives and girlfriends don't generally like it, but it works for my purposes. The D is okay. Your low E string is sometimes difficult to hear, so you can use your octave harmonic and check it with your fretted note. I also check using the 5th fret because it's a little higher in pitch and it's easier for my ears to hear. It still should match, and that's fine. My high E string is just a little sharp, so I'll move that away from the neck. Turn the volume down so it doesn't drive us crazy here. Move that away. A little bit goes a long ways. That's pretty good. Now that I've intonated this Les Paul, let me show you how to intonate a Stratocaster. It has its own set of problems, and it's not just Stratocaster model, it's any kind of pickup that has pull pieces that are magnets, so I'll show you how to take care of that. What I do when intonating a Fender is I lower the pickups, all 3 of them, almost all the way down to the pick guard. The reason for this is because those magnets, even if the pickup isn't being used, they're still magnets and they're pulling on the string, so I want the least amount of string pull that I can get out of this guitar. That gives me the most accurate reading when I'm doing this. After I've done using my number 2 Phillips for the height adjustment screws, I'll switch to a number 1 so that this screwdriver will fit in the length screw back here, and we'll check the high E string. Remember the fretted note, or the open note, and the harmonic are correct. And we're trying to match those notes to the fretted note. The fretted note is a little bit sharp, so I need to move it away from the neck. Every time you make an adjustment, you need to retune that string. That's pretty good. I'll take that. And I just go across and check all the rest of them. Go over to the D. That's pretty good. Now if you change gauges of strings, and let's say you had your guitar set up for 9 to 42s and you put 10 to 46, before you set your intonation, I would suggest that you make sure that that's the kind of strings that you want to have on your guitar. Otherwise, if you keep readjusting your intonation, you're wasting a lot of time. So figure out what gauge of string you really want on your guitar, then intonate it, and you'll be a lot happier. Otherwise, if you don't have the capability of doing this, and you have to pay somebody to do it, you're shelling out some good money there. You can hear how far off that B is. It's very sharp. And also, contrary to popular belief, all plain strings are basically the same. All the wire comes from one supplier. It's just how the ball ends are put on. So if you think that your 9,000 string from Schmedley Brothers sounds different than the von Ortner brand string that you used to buy, I'm sorry, that's purely psychological because it's the same string. And if you do switch brands of strings and it's the same gauge, your intonation should be the same. In this segment, we're going to talk about how to know whether your guitar needs its action adjusted and whether it's set up properly for ease of playing. There are certain things that you have to do. There's an order that you must adjust any guitar, any electric guitar, and if you change that order, you have to start over again. You can really screw up your guitar, end up in a shop costing you a lot of money. So the first thing that I do is I put strings on, tune the guitar to pitch, and at that point, then what I do is I check the truss rod to see if the neck is straight. I'm checking to see if it has a truss rod and if it's adjustable or not. On Gibson guitars, on their electrics, they have a truss rod adjustment is at the headstock. And on Fender guitars, for years, the adjustment was at the body end of the neck, and sometimes it's underneath the pickguard. And the only way to get to it is to either take the pickguard off or to take the neck off the body. If it's a vintage guitar that was made like before 1968, the old lacquer finishes like to stick together, and sometimes it's very difficult to remove the neck. So what I do is on those guitars, I'll take the pickguard off and make the adjustments. If it's a newer piece, you can actually get in there fairly easily, or on the vintage reissues, and you can actually take the neck off without any problem at all, which is what I would do on this guitar. On the newer guitars that they make, they also have a little plug up here in the headstock where the truss rod adjustment is hidden. To decide whether or not you need a truss rod adjustment, if you're tuned to pitch, you have 6 straight edges. And what I do is I press down the A string at the 2nd fret and at the last fret on the neck, and I check to see the distance between the string and the fret at the 11th and 12th fret, see what kind of a gap there is there. And I do the same thing between the string and the 5th fret. And if there's a gap there, depending upon the person's style of playing and how hard he plays, I try to get it anywhere from just a couple thousandths of an inch, and meaning kind of the thickness of a sheet of paper, to if they play real hard, you might give them something like 20 thousandths of an inch at the octave. After you've adjusted the truss rod to the however straight you want to get your neck, at that point I check the height of the nut, this being the nut right here. This is not and I hear this a lot, this is not a top nut, this is not a bridge, this is just the nut, period. And to check that, what you do is you take your guitar, and you have to look at it. I'm holding this so the camera can see. You press your strings down between your second and third fret and look and see what kind of a space there is between the string and the first fret all the way across. I usually hold this, just put it down on the bench and check it, or you can hold it like this, whatever works for you. You need, on your plain strings, you need about 10/1000ths of an inch, and on your wound strings, anywhere from about 10 to about 20/1000ths of an inch at the absolute most. If you get it any higher than that, then it needs to be adjusted and lowered down. If you get it any higher than 20/1000ths, you play your string at the first fret, and it won't be an F after you do your intonation. It might be an F and maybe 20 cents sharp. So to be in tune, you need to have that cut properly. There again, on on checking your action, exactly the same thing on this guitar is take your strings and check your gap at the 5th and at the 12th. I do it on the B and the A string, and that's fine. That doesn't need any adjustment. I check the nut, make sure that there's enough gap underneath each one. And I'll show you what the truss rod adjustment looks like on a Les Paul. We'll remove the truss rod cover here. This hex nut here is on the threaded end of the truss rod. The other end is anchored in the body at about somewhere around the 17th, 18th fret, somewhere in there. And what it does when you're adjusting this truss rod, by tightening it, it attempts to straighten itself. It's set in the bottom of a trough with in this fashion, kind of an arc. And by tightening it, it tries to correct itself, and it pushes up on the neck and makes your neck straighten. It does not correct any kind of side-to-side warpage. It only does overall across the length of it. Now, if you want to adjust your own truss rod, take it very slow, take a little bit at it, do a little bit at a time. If you find yourself adjusting and adjusting and adjusting and adjusting, then you have a problem, and I would suggest that you stop and go to a repair shop and find out what's wrong with your guitar. The most that you should have to move one of these is maybe do this motion maybe 3, maybe 4 times at the absolute most. But there again, you need to check. Each time you make an adjustment, you need to check this on side to side. If one side, after you make an adjustment, your string is actually, when you press it down at the end, the fingerboard and the second fret, if it's laying on all your frets, you need to back your truss rod off. You do need some kind of space between your string, because when you play, your string moves in an elliptical pattern, which is like when you're a kid, when you watch your sister or whatever, you play with a jump rope or boxers or whatever you like to watch with a jump rope. That's an elliptical pattern. And you have to have some kind of a clearance for that string. Some people play it with a lighter right-hand touch, if you're a right-handed guitar player, and you can have a straighter neck. If you play your electric guitars like you play your acoustic guitars, you need more relief in the neck. On most electrics, I try to get them as straight as I possibly can, and this one actually is fine. I don't need to adjust this at all. I'll remove the truss rod cover here, so I can expose the adjusting mechanism. Now, what's happening with this neck happens on all brands of guitars. It's not just limited to Asian guitars. It happens on anything from the most expensive guitars that are made. It's just one of those things. Wood has a temperament, if you will, and it wants to go wherever it wants to. This neck, by checking this here between a truss rod and an acoustic guitar, runs between the nut and right where the neck joins the body. This area here, the tongue of the fingerboard, there's no adjustment at all. So what I'm going to check is here, it needs a lot of adjustment. It needs a lot of adjustment on this side. And I'm going to go ahead and see what it does for me. Now, if you were to do this at home and you heard that creaking noise, don't be alarmed, because it's never been adjusted since it was manufactured. Sometimes when they put these together, they glue the fingerboards on, a little bit of glue will make its way into the truss rod cavity and lodge around the truss rod nut. That's the creaking noise that you're usually hearing, and it's just the nut actually tightening up and creaking there. It's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. If you have to turn it more than one complete revolution all the way around and nothing has been done, I would take it to a repair shop. You'll find that you won't be so nervous about your guitar that way, and you'll feel a lot better. Now that made a big difference doing that. Actually plays okay now. To make sure that your string is adjusted, your strings are adjusted properly, you can lower it. You lower your strings down until it does not fret out. And fretting out is it has to clear the center of the fingerboard when you bend at least a whole step. Some players like a step. Some players like a step and a half. A step is just from one dot to the next dot. A step and a half is up 3 frets. So it needs to clear, and when it does that, it's hitting the middle of the fingerboard. So what that means is that this saddle is too low and it needs to go up in the air. Now if you make this adjustment before you do your truss rod adjustment and the nut adjustments, you're going to have to go back and redo everything all over again. Remember, there is a specific order that you do all of this in. And every time you make an adjustment, you need to retune that string. It needs to come up just a little bit. Now I'm assuming that the frets on this guitar are level and that the truss rod is perfect. That's acceptable right there. That's as low as I can get it, and I can back off just an 1/8 of a turn at a time on each one and sit here and try to get it until it doesn't make any noises on anything. But for me, that's just fine. What I do after that is you can either take a measurement or eyeball it and see how far the string is from the last fret and just adjust the height of your strings at the end of the fingerboard so they're all the same. To do that, what I do is get a capo out, put it on at the first fret so that I don't have to worry about the height of the nut anymore, and then I adjust the strings with my Allen wrench. There are several companies that have little plastic jigs that you can get to hold over your strings or under your strings so that you can do it absolutely perfect. I don't find that I need to do that. I just eyeball it. It works very, very well, especially after 25 years of doing this. The rest of these strings seem to be just fine. So that's just adjusting this particular guitar. On a Gibson Les Paul, the adjustment is not as refined as on a Fender guitar. You have only an overall adjustment up and down on either end. The arch of the bridge itself, the way it's machined, it has a preset arch which follows the curvature of the fingerboard. And if all the notches are cut so that it still follows the fingerboard, then you just adjust these two wheels right here to give you the overall height adjustment. On a Fender guitar, you have individual saddle adjustments, so you can set each string rather than the whole thing. Both of them work very well. Neither one is better than the other. It's just that's the way they do it. It's kind of Chevy and Ford, if you will. You might be wondering, how do you adjust the action on your acoustic? Well, after you have your guitar tuned to the standard pitch and you've got your nut has been checked for the correct height, at that point, about the only adjustment that you have is back here at your bridge saddle. In bridge saddle, you need to have at least a 1/16 of an inch sticking up above the bridge base itself. If you don't, and I've seen many guitars where the saddle has been ground all the way down, even with wood, and it does have to stick up. You need to have enough pressure on there so that you get a good clear tone out of it. That entails a lot of some machining and some woodworking, and I don't recommend that your average guitar player just go ahead and do that. Now, if you want to lower the saddle, if it's sticking up a lot and the action's still up in the air, what you can do is you can take a file, take the saddle off the guitar, make some, scribe some lines on either side of your bridge. You can make a pencil mark or whatever, take it out, put it in a vise, and you can file down a little bit, trying to copy the curvature of the fingerboard as you take the saddle material away. There again, if you feel a little squeamish about that, just take it to a good repair shop and have them do that for you. At my shop, I don't necessarily take saddle material off the top. I actually take it off the bottom, but I have a big belt sander and I just set it on there and take off 10 to 20,000 increments at a time, depending upon how far I have to go. If your saddle is actually too low, there's a couple of ways to take care of that. If someone else has filed it down, or you did, or you made a mistake, there's two ways to go about it. You can glue a shim to the bottom side of the saddle and then fit that, trim that down even with the outside edges of your original saddle and fit that back in. Or you can just get another saddle piece and put that in. I prefer, well, it depends on the situation. If there's an acoustic pickup in it, I actually prefer to put a piece of spruce or a piece of cedar on the bottom of the pickup, and that way it cushions the pickup against the piezo elements, and it actually knocks off some of that brittleness that you get with those style of pickups. In the case of you just need a new saddle, just a piece of bone or micarta or any other good saddle stock that you can buy at a guitar shop works very, very well. In this segment, we're going to talk about how to adjust the height of your pickups, how close to your strings, and what kind of sound you're going after. On a Gibson pickup, you have 6 individual height adjustment screws, and you have the slugs on this side. What this does is you can actually adjust the volume of each one of these strings on this pickup. On a Fender guitar, you have, let's see here, the staggered pole pieces are preset and are not adjustable. I really recommend that you don't try to adjust them by hammering them in or whatever. Just leave them alone. You can damage the coil and end up with a dead pickup. So just leave them the way that they are. Because the magnet is always on, and you can't just get the pickup up against the strings on a Stratocaster, you'll get all these weird overtones and these funny warbling noises. I'm going to show you what that sounds like now by adjusting this pickup too close to the strings. You get all these other notes that you didn't ask for, and it sounds horrible. By lowering this back down, it should clear this up quite a bit. There is no set measurement per se as to how close you can get Fender pickups, although on the treble side, I adjust these within about a 1/16 to maybe 330 seconds away from the strings. I adjust the bridge pickup first because there's the least amount of string movement on this pickup. And in doing that, I raise that up, get the treble side set, and then I run anywhere from an 1/8 to lower on the bass side. Because you have a bigger string on this side and there's more string movement, you need to have this farther away. That gives you a good balance between the two outside strings. And you get a decent balance that way. When you move from this pickup to the next pickup, you can leave your treble side adjusted the same height, but you have to stagger as you get closer to the neck. Otherwise you get all these weird overtones and this warbling noise. Let me adjust that now. If you find that you can't get your pickup far enough away, sometimes what you have to do is reset up the guitar or have a shim put in underneath the neck. Some Fenders have an adjustable mechanism on the back of the neck, or other guitars that are Fender-esque. But you need to get this neck pickup as far away as possible because there's the most amount of string movement right here. It's a nice clear sound now, whereas before it was all these garbling overtones. With a Gibson guitar, you can, because the magnet's on the bottom of the pickups, you can get away with the pickups being a lot closer, which comes to another thing. On Gibson guitars, a lot of people have removed the covers off the pickups just so they can get the coils closer to the strings, which makes your amplifier break up a lot faster. So you see a lot of older guys, old pictures of people that 20, 30 years ago would start taking their covers off their guitars, and it became very fashionable. And after 20 years of that going on, new players coming up, learning how to play guitar, did not know why they didn't have covers on their pickups and just assume it was just strictly a look, when in fact it's a sound. The pickup cover does two things. It does provide some shielding and get rid of some unwanted extra 60-cycle hum, but because that cover is, there's a space between the cover and the top of the coils, you take that off, you can get your pickups just a little bit closer and make the strings break up a little bit more. And let's face it, in rock and roll, everybody seems to want to get more distortion out of their guitar. So that's why you see pickups with no covers on. Anyway, the height adjustment on the treble side is the same. You can get your bass side actually almost the same distance away. You've got to keep in mind, though, that the bridge pickup, again, on any guitar, has the least amount of string movement down here, and so that needs to be closer to the strings than this. There are some pickup companies that have made pickups that have two pickups that are basically identical, that are marked bridge pickup and neck pickup. And the bridge pickup is the same, they're the same pickup, except that the neck pickup is slightly underwound, meaning there's not as many wraps on the coil, so it's not a lesser output level. And if you put the pickups at the same level, you will achieve the same volume. You have basically two different style of pickups, whether they be Fender or Gibson. You have humbuckings and you have single coils. Humbuckings came about in the late 50s because single coils attract 60-cycle hum. When you plug it in, you get all this noise. Some people can stand it, some people can't stand it. And Gibson designed a pickup that bucked the hum, as it were. There's an actual model number which escapes me at the moment, but the humbucking pickup was created, and it has changed and revolutionized the whole music industry. Now, there are also pickups that are hum canceling that fit into a Fender pocket, and there are several manufacturers that make several variations of it, Fender among them. And you can, if the 60-cycle hum bothers you, you can always change those pickups out. I really recommend that you go ahead and make an attempt at least, but be very careful, because the windings of the coil, the little wire that's in there is what they call usually 42 or 44 gauge wire, and if you take one of your hairs, pull it out of your head and take a look at that, that's about how thick that wire is in there, and it's very, very brittle and easy to break. So you must be very, very careful in handling of the pickups. Don't be afraid of it, but just be very careful. And some of the manufacturers actually, when you buy pickups, have a little wiring diagram, and it's pretty easy to follow. If you have no soldering technique whatsoever, though, and you've never used a soldering iron or gun, it is a new experience, and you must get good solder connections, or otherwise you're going to have problems. And if you do have a problem, of course, you can come to somebody like myself, and we can take care of your wiring needs. I want to talk about how do you know when you need your frets dressed, or when your frets need to be replaced. On this acoustic guitar, I'll move the string out of the way, and if we can get a shot of this first fret here and maybe the second fret, you see that there's a dent growing in the middle of the fret, right where the string goes. When you start to notice that you've got an impression where the string is being pressed down, that's a good time to have somebody dress your frets. Now, if you're a little squeamish, I suggest that you take it to a good repair shop. You can try this yourself, but it takes quite a bit of tools. When you start seeing this dent, I recommend that you really get into a shop and get it taken care of. If you get it to the point where there's an actual groove there, so that when you press the string down, it always goes to that groove, now you have a problem, and your fret is probably so worn that it's going to have to be replaced. If you have it dressed, when it's just a little dimple like this, it's very easy to clean all of this up, and you'll actually, even though you're removing material, you'll extend the fret life because you're not making a saw cut into your fret. Once that cut starts going in there, your frets will wear out like nothing flat. There are several different sizes of fretware that are available, and there's several suppliers of them. There are German, American, and Japanese fretware for the most part. And the American fretware is probably the hardest. The Japanese have a huge selection, but I prefer either German or American fretware. Some guys who play prefer a vintage style fret, like what is in this vintage style Stratocaster here. And this has a size of fretware that was originally used from about 1950 to the current vintage reissues that they're using. In this Gibson Les Paul, this is a what's called 6100 fretwire, which is one of the largest fret wires that's available. It's about 53 thousandths tall off the fingerboard. And the reason for this kind of a fret wire is that it makes it very easy to do any kind of bending. And a guy named Larry Carlton in the 70s popularized this fret wire on all the Steely Dan records. You can hear what he does there. Since then, many players have adapted this style of fret, and it makes for all your bending very easy. You can have extremely low action and still have all the bendability. With a guitar with this kind of fret wire with a vintage radius on the fingerboard, it makes it kind of difficult to do the same thing, and so you have to have a slightly higher action. Part of that is due to the height of the fret wire, and the other part is the extreme radius of the fingerboard. The radius of the fingerboard on a vintage style Fender is 7 1/4, and Gibsons run anywhere between 9 1/2 to about 12 inches a radius. If you take a compass, you can lay it out on a piece of paper at home and you just draw yourself some arcs, and you can see exactly what that is. Just set your compass at 9 1/2 inches, draw that arc, or 7 1/4, and you'll see what I mean by that. I've explained the differences on these two guitars, which just happen to be mine. And I talked about fret dressing, so I thought what we would do is go back to my shop, and I can actually show you what goes into a fret dress. I'll preface that by telling you what we're basically going to do is make sure that the frets are level across the entire length of the fingerboard, and then we'll recrown the tops of the frets and then polish them up so that they feel real nice. When you bend strings, you don't have any little weird squeaky noises, and it makes a huge difference. I'll also show you how to just polish your own frets at home so that you don't have to go out and have it done. There's several things that you can do at home that's fairly easy to do. So let's go. Hi, welcome to the shop. I'm going to dress some frets here, and I'm going to show you how to take care of standard fret wear, and it'll make your frets actually last longer by doing what I'm about to do, and it makes it play a lot better. The first thing we've got to do is need to protect the body so that we don't scratch the finish at all. And I use a piece of vinyl. After I put the vinyl on, I take some tape and I put it on my pants leg or on my shop apron to remove some of the stickum on it, so that I don't remove any of the finish after I pull this back off. Nobody likes to have the finish removed accidentally, so this is just to protect and make the vinyl stay in place. Okay. The next thing that gets done is I take a black felt pen and very carefully start at the first fret here. So I can do this right-handed. So I blacken in the tops of the frets. Go all the way down the fingerboard. Okay, now that we've got all the frets, we need to adjust the truss rod, get the neck as straight as we can. Do this. Need to straighten the neck so that we don't remove too much fret from any one place in the neck. I needed to adjust the truss rod because when you take the strings off your neck, you have a rod that's adjusted for the tension of the strings. With no strings on it, you get an arch in the fingerboard. So because there are no strings on it, we need to loosen that tension of the neck and make it straight with no strings on. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to use a carborundum sharpening stone, which has been modified so that I can now level the frets. I don't use a file. A lot of guys do. Some people don't. It's a personal preference. And I use a carborundum stone to do all the leveling with. I'll show you how I do that now. I start in first position and use the weight of the stone and run it across the top of the frets. Immediately, you can see where the places that are low where it's worn, and we need to file down to the bottom of all these places where all that string wear is. This is a crowning file that I use. It's a diamond encrusted file. There is a standard file that you can buy. There's several different kinds, but I like this because it cuts both directions, it stays clean, and it cuts a lot faster. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first fret here and try to file this so that I have a nice clean line right through the center of it and restore the crown to the top of the fret. I'm going to go ahead and just finish the rest of these off, and when I get done we'll come back and I'll show you how to polish the frets and make them feel real nice and shiny and real slippery. It's a real difference. You'll like it a lot. The next step is to take this fine cut three-cornered file, which has safe spots on all the edges. There's no cut there, and I go back and clean up the edges that I filed. This removes any of the heavy diamond scratches that have been put in. I work down one side at a time and just remove those cuts. It also helps to round that in. The next step is to take some 500 grit wet dry sandpaper and a basic chalkboard eraser. Wrap the sandpaper around the eraser. This 500 is real fine. It's not like what you would think about sanding wood with. And I just take it and rub it back and forth across the top of the frets. This removes all the scratches that were put in by the last file. Now I'm going to go to 600 grit sandpaper and work progressively finer until we get to 1500 grit sandpaper, and we'll have a real shiny fret. Same exact motion is used. Stay away from the corners so I don't round those over. And we'll just do the first 5 frets so you can see what that looks like. After 600 I go to 800 grit. Same movement. To check and see if I've done the job and removed all the scratches, at this point I now sand with the fret with the block, and I check for scratches. There's none. All the scratches are now going with the fret, and those are the 1500 grit scratches. Now I can switch to the steel wool. Some people don't like steel wool and are allergic to it. There are some synthetic steel wools like this Scotch Brite that I have here. I only use this on rare occasions, and in this particular guitar I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use just good old standard steel wool. I use 2 different grits. I use 3/0 and I use 4/0.
with the fret, I go ahead and I steel wool the whole fretboard and the fret.
The last thing after I get done doing my sandpaper is the final touch. And that is I use a product called Never Dull. It's a wadding, and it makes the frets feel like they're incredibly polished and they're like they're chrome plated. Here's what it does. I'll do one so you can see the difference. Rub a little bit on, take a paper towel. After you apply the Never Dull, you go back and rub it off with some paper towel or a rag. And the difference between this and the Never Dull, this is really shiny, but this is shiny and slippery, and it's a great, great feel. Some general maintenance tips for you are, there's a lot of guitar polishes on the market. I personally don't use any commercially manufactured guitar polishes or furniture polishes. I do use some lemon oil on the fingerboard. Here in Seattle, I recommend that it only goes on twice a year. I know a lot of people who like to put oil of some sort on their fingerboard, and they do it almost every time they change strings. It can be a problem when you need a guitar refretted, when your frets are worn out to the point of they need to be replaced. And I've taken frets out and literally seen a lake of oil in the slots in the fingerboard. There are several silicone products for playing fast and making the fingerboard very slippery. That's great as far as that goes, but it does soak into the wood and it makes it difficult to have frets put back in, and sometimes they just don't like to be seated, and it can cost you extra if you need a refret done. As far as cleaning guitars go, what we use in my shop is a solvent called naphtha. We use that on most of the guitars that we actually clean. That removes all the dirt and crud, slime. This area of a guitar here is real prone because your arm is resting on that, and you get that kind of armpit buildup of sludge right here of years of club playing. And to take that off, naphtha, which is a solvent for varnish, not lacquer, that cleans that off very well, and then we have to polish the area back out. It doesn't hurt the lacquer at all. It just removes the crud. On fingerboards that get a buildup of crud from playing around the frets, sometimes we have to take some naphtha and a toothbrush and actually clean along the frets, but that isn't very common. The polishes that I actually use automotive products. I use some 3M products, and I use some Meguiar's products, both of which work very, very well. You can go to any kind of automotive place, whether it be a parts or a paint shop, and look at what they have. My particular favorite is a 3M Finesse It. It's a white product. It comes in a bottle. They have everything color-coded, and the white stuff is extremely good. I use it for cleaning off anything and everything, or polishing the guitars. It works well on lacquer. It works extremely well on acrylic urethanes, enamel finishes like Tom Anderson guitars, and works very well on all the Japanese polyester and epoxy type finishes. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned some things, and I hope you lost some of the fear of doing some maintenance on your guitars. It's not that difficult, and if you find it difficult, you know, there's always a trained professional around that you can go to, and we're always happy to help you out. Anyway, have fun with your guitar, and we'll see you next time.